Delighted to welcome in our good pal who was on the ground over there in Abu Dhabi at UFC 257 this past weekend. He's just back in Stockholm, Sweden. The legendary Philip O'Connor. And Pete, he couldn't join us. He's a bit. Are you upset? Or are you happy? What's the situation? We some technical difficulties, so Pete can't be on with us.
You know, when you have the chance to talk to the two greatest in the game, you want to take that chance. But unfortunately, today, I don't know what it is. He's disrespecting me here. He doesn't want to be part of this. That's fine. Maybe I'm just not good enough for him anymore. With the BBC and the Bash and all that. That's okay. I can take that. Well, let me tell you now, Fight Island, man, it's real. It's fucking real far away. So I'm only just in the door now. Yeah, like we're talking now, what is it? It's about 6, it's just coming up on 6 o'clock in Stockholm, so it's 5 o'clock in Ireland. So I would have left my hotel on Fight Island at midnight your time, and I literally got in the door 5 minutes before you called. So it's been a long trip home, but it was a great trip. It was just, it was mad. Like the whole thing is just fucking mental, but we'll get into all that. Ask me a question, tell me what you want to know, and I'll share it all with you.
Definitely, obviously a mad weekend. Dustin Poirier overcoming the odds and the strong odds in order to beat Dublin's Conor McGregor. First of all, the media in general, the MMA media, have got a lot of criticism over the last couple of weeks. Can you just, first of all, set the picture, set the tone over there, what it was like, the whole situation in the bubble, and the relationship with the UFC and what was going on between the media and them over the past week?
Okay, well, we'll have to probably back it up then a few weeks, even back when the fight was announced, right? So when all this began, we didn't know where the fight was going to be until probably after Christmas time sometime. So we did the usual thing. You and me do these things to sort of off our own bat, right? Where I booked a hotel in Vegas and I booked a hotel in Abu Dhabi. I knew Conor was going to fight in one of the two, so I had hotels booked. And then I said to the UFC, like the way I do these things is, the listeners may not know this, but I look at it and I see if I can get enough work as a freelancer to be able to make it worth my while to pay all my expenses and go over there. So eventually, enough things ticked in and I went, yeah, okay, I'm going to go. And I've been doing all of Conor's fights since about 2015. So I thought, okay, this is definitely one that I want to see now. He's back. We'll see what he's like. So we got that in then. And then the UFC came back and said, no, there's going to be a bubble, right? So you can't book your own flights. We'll book your flight. We'll fix your visa. We'll fix your carnet forms, your customs forms for getting your cameras into the country. We'll book your hotel. So you have to do everything their way, right? Now, we're always doing this. Like, the Irish hotel in Las Vegas, as you well know, has always been Hooters Hotel, because Hooters is close to the MGM and it's cheap, right? So that's where the Irish media tends to stay, because it's a hard business to make money out of, Niall. And I literally can't motivate traveling all the way to Abu Dhabi if I'm not going to make money. I have a family to feed back here, man. So much as I love to hang out with you and Pete by the pool, I've got to make some money whilst I'm away there. So instantly, like the prices just went through the roof, right? So there was 2 hotels in operation. The 4-star Crown Hotel was where a lot of the staff, the referees, Mark Goddard, Herb Dean, and all the journalists were staying. So they were staying at the Crown Plaza 4-star hotel, which came in at the eye-watering sum of $190 a night, right? Now, if we were staying in Hooters or the Excalibur or whatever, Las Vegas, we'll mostly get it for like, yeah, exactly. Like, so seriously, I think I had a 4-star hotel not too far from Yas Island for like €400 for the whole week, right? So this ended up being, it sort of, put a hole in my fucking budget. And then they came back and I was looking at flights on Skyscanner and this kind of thing, same thing, €400 or €500. No, that's going to cost you like $1,200. So like already, like that's why I know I used to have very little hair, but I've even less now because it's just hair on what was left out, But it was still okay because, the work was still tipping in that. So we got there, but it's a really weird situation now because a lot of things are different, right? So there's no photographers there as such, right? The UFC have 1 or 2 photographers, and then they make all their pictures available, right? So all the guys, Per from Sweden, like anybody from MMA fighting or for Junkie, they wouldn't be there at all. So you've only got a couple of photographers there, and obviously you can't have press row elbow to elbow, or you can't have the sort of when you have the press conferences where you have everybody sort of stuck together with their tripods. That's out the window. You can't do that in the COVID situation. So there's a lot less accreditations floating around, and it really felt like kind of being in school a lot of the time because they put you in a room, they put your name down, and there was like tape on the floor, stickers on the floor saying this is where you are. And in a way it was great because there wasn't any of this jostling and shoves, like, trying to get questions in and that kind of thing. It was actually quite civilized for a change, which I've never seen in MMA media before. But on the other side of it then, I kind of get the feeling that there was, it was, I don't know, we were really sort of, stroking the back of the UFC and being nice to them because everybody was getting their accreditations. Yeah. And they didn't want to do it. And that's just not really how I work, right? So as I was saying to you, I'm dependent on getting a certain amount of work done to make my money over there. Right now, I asked the UFC if I could do a story about the bubble, and they said yes, and they're going to provide a spokesperson. Didn't provide a spokesperson, and it ended up I couldn't do the story, and it ended up costing me several €100, right?
Jeez.
Just something that happens, but they don't think in that way, right? And the other thing is that, like, you know, I work, as you well know, for two of the biggest news agencies in the world, and for some reason the UFC just don't want to know. So, you know, Dana, the next time Dana drops a video telling us all about journalism and media, yeah, I don't know about that, you know. So it was a little bit weird.
Why
because,
do you think
like,
that is, Phil? Why do you think that is? Why don't they want to work with Reuters and Associated Press? Why?
I think it's a weird one because their audience, the whole sport now was built on sort of blogs and online and in this, you know, like it's almost like an alternate media sphere, right? And they really want to look after them. So I think actually that on the day before the fight, Conor had a few minutes over to do, and rather than go, there's a billion readers every day, right? So if you want to let the whole world know about that fight and their pay-per-view, that's the way to do it. And I think he ended up having a chat with Robbie from Barstool Sports. Yeah. And that's nothing to do with Robbie, you know. I mean, Robbie got the opportunity. He goes in there, he does his job, right? And Barstool have a huge reach as well.
Of course.
But all those people that Robbie talks to already knew the fight was on. Right? Now, if the UFC had thought about it a little bit, they might have said, okay, well, we give Robbie 3 minutes, we give Phil 2 minutes, because those 2 minutes that they give me, where they get to hype up the fight, will reach a whole load of people that didn't even know the fight was on in Abu Dhabi, right? So, you know, really, I'd love to say, and I've tried to talk to them, but, you know, I think there's a certain amount of resistance as well. You know, they're happy with what they got. That thing of control was very important as well, you know. So it was very difficult to get hold of a microphone. Obviously the story came out about Conor last week that he's being sued in the Irish High Court, right? And sort of instantly it became an awful lot more difficult to talk to the people that we know in Conor's camp. We were told that they weren't going to be going on the record, they weren't going to be doing interviews, and I can understand that, because there's two things there, right? One is they're not going to want to speak about that situation, and the other thing is, like, we don't want to endanger anybody getting the right to a fair trial, anybody getting their day in court, anybody getting justice. And that applies to Conor and that applies to the person suing him, you know. So that's no value judgment there. So they probably did the right thing. I mean, it would be absolutely terrible for me to do an interview and hang, you know, one of Conor's coaches out to dry. Like, you know, they say something to me that they shouldn't say and I publish it, we all wind up in trouble. So that I can understand, you know, that's fine. And I wouldn't have asked those questions anyway. But the UFC, the same thing. Like, as soon as that came out, you know, they knew that the story had broken, and there was just, you know, there was no comment. There was a bit of a lockdown there, and it kind of felt, because there was no other Irish journalist there. I think there might have been one working for, I don't know who he was working for, but I certainly had a Northern Irish accent there, and that was really it, which is weird because I ended up doing a lot of stuff for the Irish Independent newspaper, and the top 5 sports stories all weekend from Saturday morning until this morning were all about UFC 257 and Conor McGregor, and I wrote 4 of the 5 of them as it was, you know. So there seems to have been a huge interest there, and yet the UFC were playing, you know, it's kind of like watching kids at a disco. You know, the UFC were sticking to one wall and the Irish media were sticking to another wall. But if they just met in the dance floor, things might have happened. We might have had a beautiful ending there, but it wasn't to be. But it was, as I say, a fascinating time. So when we got there, we had the usual program of events, but because there was fights on Wednesday and Saturday and the previous Saturday, of course, everything was condensed. So I think it was on the Wednesday we had a sort of a talent or a UFC media day for UFC 257. Then we had the press conference, and then on the Friday we had the weigh-ins, and we had Daniel Cormier was put up, Mike Brown was put up, John Cavan was put up, and it worked pretty well in that sort of little situation. But the weird thing was that the W Hotel, which is where all the UFC brass were staying, where all Conor's people were staying, all the fighters were staying, that's basically in the middle of the racetrack where they have the Formula One racing there, right? Now you can't. Yeah. So we couldn't go out and do that. But what we did have all the fucking time, though, was people driving racing cars outside. So you're sitting there talking to John Cannon, and the next day, all you hear is, and it was just annoying the whole time, like, you know. But it was weird. But, and I think Dustin Poirier actually said it afterwards, that the day before the fight, or you don't know, the Saturday, so the fights were obviously on Sunday local time, and he said on Saturday the fucking cars nearly drove bad, you know. So it was a weird setup, and then we weren't allowed to go anywhere. So we ate all our meals in the hotel restaurant. We were allowed to go as far as the pool, weren't allowed to go to the beach, we were allowed to go to the W, the venue, and that was it. So you couldn't go to a shop, you couldn't go to a different restaurant. There was no, right lads, we have a few hours off on Saturday before the fights, let's go and have a beer at London, we can have a sleep in the afternoon. All that went out the window. So we were basically sort of locked down in the hotels the whole time. And you know what? I have to say, I've been critical of the UFC in the very beginning of the bubble. I didn't think it was a responsible thing to do in the beginning, but now they take it really, really seriously. So literally from the moment you tell them you're going, they say, right, I've done 6 COVID tests in 2 weeks. Right. Wow. So you do one 10 days out, then you do one 72 hours before you fly. You do one as soon as you arrive. You do one 24 hours after you arrive. You did one on the Tuesday for Wednesday's fights, and then one on the Friday for Saturday's fights. And that one on the Friday was what got me onto the last plane home here today. So it's extremely thorough. The whole thing was really well thought out. So whereas it wasn't probably the beginning back in July when they started running, so it was back in June when they did the flights in Florida. I can't remember when.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit haphazard, but it is much better now. And you know what? I'd be happy to do it again if it keeps the fighters and the media and the people who work for the UFC safe.
Yeah, in fairness to them, I think, I agree with you. I think they've done a fantastic job with the bubble. From anyone I've sort of talked to in relation to who's been out at the events, etc. It seems to be very, very thorough, and you've just sort of reaffirmed my thought process there. Philip, right, obviously a huge reaction to the main event and the result of the main event. And, a big upset, as I said, and on, everyone's sort of mind and the bookmaker's mind. What was the reaction like in the arena in Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, it was amazing because the UFC told us there was going to be 2,000 people in attendance, right? Now, Dana came out afterwards, as he does, and he tells you the bonuses and he tells you the attendance, and he said it was 2,600.
Yeah.
And I was going, hang on a second. This is like, remember when Ireland played Italy in USA 94?
Yeah,
and everybody who's my age, yeah, exactly. But everybody who's my age will say exactly what you said there, right? Everybody was there. There should have been 1 million people in that venue, right? And I honestly think, Noel, there must have been 5,000 or 6,000 there because as Conor was coming to the cage, and even earlier on, even during the prelims, when Amir Al-Basi went out there for the first fight of the night, there was loads of people in the place. Big VIP area with you had these huge sort of armchair things, and they had snacks and that, and they were all sort of dotted out quite close to the cage. But then all the way up into the gods, you had loads of people up there. So I'd say there's probably thousands more than what the UFC said that were there. But the atmosphere is pretty good. I thought it was going to be really flat because on Wednesday it was quite flat for the Magny Chiesa fight. So that was quite flat. But all those people there. And then they had they had a drone light show to start the main card, which was pretty cool. But then when Conor was doing his walkout, and it was like being in Vegas. Okay, it wasn't as loud, but the buzz was there right enough, But then as the fight started, I have never been, like many people, I have never been assured that Conor was going to win, right? And this is from talking to everybody around him, and it's from talking to him during the week and seeing him at the press conference and just watching him being himself and how harmonious he was and how calm he was and how he spoke about his preparations. And then I spoke to, obviously, people in his camp and people around him and his management and that, and they were saying, no, this is the best we've ever seen him. And then to look at him as well, he was in brilliant shape, made 100%. Weight, no problem whatsoever. And then he went in there, and in the very beginning of the fight, this is what absolutely shocked me, because in the first round, if you look back at it, it doesn't look, but from where I was sitting at the side of the cage, Conor got everything his own way in the first round, right? So even when Dustin took him down, right, he managed to sort of scoot backwards towards the fence, and everything was working for him. And then when he got up in the first round, he couldn't land the left hand, but he landed a couple of right hands, and I could see on Dustin's face from where I was sitting that he wasn't happy with this. This wasn't part of his game plan. And going into the break, if you had told me in the break between the first and second round that Dustin was just about to knock him out, I would have thought you were out of your mind, right? Because that's just the vibe in the place. And it all turned up against the fence, like when we got into the second round, and obviously those kicks were happening, but the feel in the venue was that Dustin was going with the leg kicks, and it was the right thing to do, but that we didn't get the feeling at all that Conor was being hampered by that. And it was only when Dustin pushed off the fence and you saw that Conor couldn't move, we went, hang on a fucking second, those was leg killing him. And then when Conor moved back towards the fence as well, and when Dustin started to land, you could see he couldn't get out of the way. And that was when we realized actually that was what broke the fight wide open, was those leg kicks from Dustin. And to be honest, it was amazing. It was a super game plan from Dustin. I'm kind of surprised that Conor stood in the pocket for so long. You know, he sort of stood in front of him, and it depends who he's fighting, right? But sometimes he'll stand there and you'll see, he sort of tilts his head a little bit as he's looking for his openings, right? But if you go back to the earlier part of his career when he used to dance in and out, a little bit like Wonder Boy sometimes does, the 2 feet bouncing in and out. I think he mentioned it in the press conference afterwards. And I think that, when you think that Conor did exactly the same thing to Nate, right? Now, it's not the same kind of leg kick, but it's the same principle. He wanted to stop Nate coming forward and pressuring him. And that's kind of what Dustin didn't want. Dustin didn't want Conor coming inside, slipping a punch and landing, because Conor wasn't going to just sit there and wait and try to draw in Dustin and counter punch the whole time. He wanted to be on the front foot, and my God, did it seem to cost him at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was very shocked with as you said, how static he was on his feet, and obviously with a compromised knee, but it was just sort of odd that we didn't see sort of the change of the stance and the elusiveness on the feet from Conor McGregor, even from the get-go, I feel, in the fight. Philip, what do you think the UFC are going to do now? I think, very much the case was over the last couple of weeks with the ABC show as well, when Dana had that announcement. We learnt nothing new with that, and I believe, and I think you probably go along the same lines, they were expecting a Conor McGregor win and they were going to go after that rematch at all costs. But what do you think they're going to do now? I think Khabib is done. What do you look at when you see the lightweight division? What do you see the UFC are going to do with that lightweight strap?
Okay, at the moment, I see a massive Khabib-shaped hole in the lightweight division, right? If we go back to when Khabib fought in Justin Gaethje, right? Ask P.T. Carroll, the coward P.T. Carroll, who wouldn't even come on and throw down with me on this podcast, right?
Disgrace,
ask P.T. Carroll, and he'll show you the WhatsApp message where I predicted at 17 minutes past 5 on the evening of the Gaethje fight, right? I predicted that if Khabib won, he was going to retire. And that happened. And ever since then, I have said that he's not coming back, right? Hashtag MMA retirements, etc., right? But he's not coming back now, right? And everybody I spoke to, right? Dana White's been going on, oh, he's coming back, he's coming back. If you see something interesting, and even Conor said it at the press conference, like, that's Dana saying that. That's not Khabib saying that. Everybody I spoke to, from Daniel Cormier to people who have asked, I spoke to them and I said, look, I'm not going to use your name in public, but everybody I know who knows Khabib, two things, right? One is he's not coming back, and two, he still hates Conor, right? So he doesn't want to give Conor the satisfaction, not even the opportunity to get it back. Khabib has no doubt in his mind that he would slaughter Conor again if he was to come back. But Khabib's thing is to teach Conor, and you can have all the money in the world, no class, you don't get what you want. And Khabib was around that. He had a fantastic time last week with Umar going around the place. He was talking to the lads from Full Reptile, Dan Hardy, James, Jamie, and they were saying the same thing. They're like, no, that's just not where he's at now, right? He doesn't need to fight. He has all the money in the world, and he lives halfway up a hill in Dagestan, right? You don't need that much money. But he's also an extremely powerful man in a sporting and in a political sense there. There isn't a leader in that part of the Caucasus who wouldn't take a phone call from Khabib. There isn't a business owner who wouldn't pay money to be seen with him, right? So that's over. Now we have a situation where Dustin Poirier feels like, he was the bridesmaid for so long in this division, right? After he got beat by Conor featherweight, he went, was he beaten by Michael Johnson, I think? But other than that, he had a fairly good run of victories. Michael Johnson, but he never really, he got an interim title, lost to Khabib, but it took a long time for his stock to rise, right? So he's gone from being the bridesmaid to the bride now. But what does he do? He comes out and he says he's not going to fight the new golden boy, Michael Chandler. And Chandler put on a great performance as well. Put on like a great promo, came out, called out the three boys, right? He was never going to happen, right? But then the two boys in the other fight, he just went, okay, I'll take either one of them as well. He made a really good impression, Chandler, with the media. We've all known him to be a sort of a decent fella, well able to talk, very intelligent, knows the game, knows the UFC, knows the fighters, knows what happens, well able to deal with the pressure of it, which an awful lot of people don't do, hashtag Ben Askren. They have a hard time sort of making that sort of step up, and that name came up as well, and Michael was sort of laughing about it, but he did really well. So, I mean, the situation you have now is that basically Khabib has beaten them all and doesn't fancy beating any of them again. Dustin is the man in position, right? What wouldn't surprise me at this stage is I don't honestly see there being a whole lot more fights left in Conor McGregor's career, right? I think at some point, in 5 or 10 years' time, I think Conor will probably live to regret that he let his prime go sitting on
totally
the fence. I think PT, again, the coward who won't come on the podcast, he'll tell you, we've often had this conversation, you, me and him, watching that night in Madison Square Garden, that was as good as it ever got for Conor McGregor. It's hard to look at that now and think that that was the pinnacle of his career. And so much time spent outside the octagon, not getting the right fight, not getting the right offer, going off to box Floyd Mayweather. Now, I know that sort of secured his family and his children's futures for the rest of their lives if they play their cards right. But at the same time, that was the time. The window was so small in MMA, and it's even smaller in the UFC, and it's even smaller again at lightweight in the UFC. Yeah. And he had that time there that he could have taken on sort of different fights. Just before Khabib was at the very peak of his powers, he probably could have fit in another 2 or 3 fights that he probably would have won fairly handy. There was contenders around at that time that he could have knocked off and really cemented his legacy. But the politics and the money and things changed after that. And I do think that what may happen now is, I think what Conor wants to do, and it was the very last question at the press conference, I know because I asked it. I asked him, how do you see yourself in this lightweight title picture? Is this something you feel that you need to do? And he kind of thought about it because, he was sort of non-committal for most of the press conference, going, I don't know, I'll think it up again, the leg kicks and that, But when I asked him the question, he was saying, yeah, I would like to get that belt back. That's actually one of those things that I would like to do. And I think that would be the thing for him now, because since that night when he beat Eddie Alvarez, he's lost to Khabib, and now he's lost to Dustin. And, he had that one fight against Donald Cerrone, which lasted for 40 seconds. And, I have the greatest respect for Cowboy, but that was just, that's a nothing fight. I mean, I don't think it's anything that anybody can put any faith in. And I do think that, for Conor's legacy and for his own well-being, he talked during the week about wanting to have a highlight reel that's as long as a feature film to sit down and watch with Conor Jr. as he grows older. And I think that to do that, to have the Hollywood ending that Conor McGregor, the athlete, wants and that he deserves, he needs to go out there. He needs to fight Dustin once more and beat him. He needs to fight Nate once more, possibly beat him, but just finish that trilogy. He needs to box Manny, and he needs to get the fuck out of Dodge and go and sit back and enjoy his money and open a gym and see if he can create the next generation the way Khabib is doing down in his part of the world.
I agree. I definitely think that. I think he needs to put the boxing sort of on the back burner for the moment. If he really wants to concentrate and get his head in MMA, it needs to be MMA until he can possibly get back to that world title. I don't think he is going to lift that world title personally myself again. But right, who's champion then in the next number of months? What do you think the UFC are going to actually do with the belts? Are they going to put on Dustin Poirier, Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler? Dustin Poirier, he seemed to rule that out. What are the UFC? What line are they going to go, Phil, do you think?
I would say they know the same thing that we know, and that they will go for a Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor 3. Right, the two lads said they'd run it back. That's the easiest fight to make now in terms of getting contracts signed to that, because Dustin has said that he doesn't want Chandler, because Chandler's not going to pay him the same money that Conor's going to pay him, right? If he gets a tiny little slice of pay-per-view, that's life-changing money, right? So I'd say that's the fight that's going to happen next, just because that's what everybody wants, right? Dustin also feels an enormous debt of gratitude towards Conor, because let's not forget, Conor generated $500,000 in revenue for Dustin's foundation, right? So there's all these things come into play now. Charles Oliveira, apparently, what I heard from more than one person down there, has been offered a couple of fights, and he has been sort of sitting on his hands, right? So he didn't want to get engaged. He didn't want to get involved in any fights that would have been on UFC 257, because he wanted to keep himself fresh for the outcome of the lightweight title picture. And if you know anything about the UFC's matchmaker, they hate people who won't fight, right? When there's options there, when there's people ready to fight there, when you need people prepared. Michael Chandler went to Fight Island last time around, didn't fight, made weight, a whole lot as an alternative, right? And Charles Oliveira didn't do that. One of the fights I think he was offered was Dan Hooker, and Oliveira said, I don't know if I can make it in time, right? And like that, to anybody in the UFC has gone, look at pal, you got this, and it's a good thing and a bad thing with the UFC, because, with the UFC, we talk about freedom and the freedom to earn and that kind of thing. You're free to take whatever they offer you at any given time. And if you don't take it, you go to the back of the fucking queue, you take a new ticket, and you see when your number comes up again. So don't think that Oliveira is the top name. Dana's going to sit down with the boys and girls tomorrow. They're all going back to Vegas. They got back there at some point today. And they're going to sit down tomorrow. Tuesday's matchmaking day is what I was told, and they're going to work this out. I don't think Oliveira's name is on the list. I think Dan Hooker might be thrown in there. Gaethje is still in there. Tony Ferguson is getting himself involved in things. Tony against Conor will be a fight that everybody would like to see, just from a stylistic point of view. But I do think that, I think there's a limit now, and especially you have to remember, this is the first time that Conor McGregor has been knocked out in his. Obviously, he suffered a TKO against Mayweather in boxing. I'm not going to count that, right? Yeah. But he was hit pretty hard. Okay, he was out by the time he went down. He was out there. And this is a scary place for any fighter to be, because I remember Steve Collins, the famous Irish super middleweight champion of the world, a few years ago. I was doing a gig with him in London where we had a whole bunch of people who weren't sports fans, but I was doing a question and answer session with him, and one of them said, "You're not afraid, getting hit in the head?" And he says, "Look, if you're a professional boxer, the whole idea is not to get hit in the head, at all, And I think that Conor's going to, wake up. He talked a lot yesterday at the press conference about his kids and say, look, the sun's up, because, he was talking at the press conference at like 11 o'clock. And he said, the sun's up. He could go, go to the yacht, go be by the pool at the W with his kids, enjoy life, right? And you're not going to enjoy life like Nate Diaz, the amount of slaps in the head he's had. Tony Ferguson lately, I'd be worried about Tony, There's a lot of fighters there, and we've heard this story. We've seen it. Was it MMA Fighting had a good long story about CTE.
Spencer Fisher, yeah.
Yeah, and like the thing about CTE is no money in the world can protect you from it. There's no cure. That's just what happens. And I know John Kavanagh has spoken in the book Win or Learn, which I was slagging, available in all good bookstores still. He was saying that they don't spar hard. They try not to go full force, but fellas like that, it's really, really hard
tough.
not to get fellas like that to go. You know, you're going to get your fair share of digs, and especially when Conor was coming up on the regional scene and through Cage Warriors, and you know, given a punch to take a punch and that kind of thing. Now he has been lucky; he hasn't been knocked out. You know, there's been other fighters have taken an awful lot more damage, but I don't think Conor wants to take that damage because it doesn't take very much. Certain fighters will tell you that they remember the fight and they remember the blow that sort of put them on their heels and was go, hang on a second, and that they haven't been the same since, you know. And against Michael Chandler, yeah, Michael Chandler, the way he took out Dan Hooker, like, you know, the violence involved in the finish of that fight. And by Jesus, Dustin Poirier wasn't far behind when he was finishing Conor there either, you know. So that's something that has to be taken into account as well, you know. So I'd say, you know, their ideal thing would probably be to do it in July, maybe sometime, you know, International Fight Week, that Dustin takes on Conor for the title, you know, because that'll allow them to string it out a bit. They can, you know, they can sort of set up Gaethje against Hooker or you know, whoever, Hooker against Tony, whatever, you know, and that'll allow them to build it a little bit. Let that fight happen, and then either in September or in December you put Conor back in there against Nate Diaz, because still in all, I haven't talked about that fight for such a long time, but I still really want to see it. A part of me doesn't want to see it because I don't believe that Nate Diaz needs to get hit any more in the head than he already has been in his life. But I just still want to see. I still want that show. Like, I think that would awaken the old Conor, Conor of the one-liners, Conor of the crack. There was very little of that last week. It was all very respectful, and he'd be respectful of Nate as well, I'd say, because I do think he's a changed man. I think fatherhood has changed him. He's been on a better path the last year. We all know the issues that he's had legally. He got himself into a lot of trouble. I think he's on the path out of that now. I certainly hope so. But I think that and I think that should be it, Niall. I mean, the really hard part of it, one of the things I wrote for the Irish Independent today was, you know, this whole idea of, like, you know, what we expect. You know, an awful lot of prize fighters go in there and they take 2 or 3 fights more than they should, because they're looking for that last payday. They're looking for that last title fight. Look at Anderson Silva, you know, the legacy of that man. Imagine if he had quit at the peak of his powers. Imagine Conor had to quit that night in Madison Square Garden, you know. And okay, he wouldn't have made as much money, but I just think that, you know, for their own sake, because after fighting, you know, when the crowd goes away, you have to live with yourself. You have to get up every morning. You know, look at Frank Bruno. He made it to being heavyweight champion of the world. And when it finished, Frank suffers from bipolar disorder and spent an awful lot of time in and out of institutions. It took an awful long time for Mike Tyson to be able to live with himself. You know, there's so many stories, and all of them are fucking sad. You almost never hear of a heavyweight or a UFC fighter or a Bellator fighter who just retires and they're happy all the days of their life, you know, because it's such a huge hole. You know, if you take out that adrenaline rush that Conor's had for the last few years. So I really hope that, you know, that he can find a way to finish his career in a way that's deserving of his legacy, in a way that remembers the great fighter that he once was and that he still can be, and that he can get out of there with his money, and that he can get out of there and enjoy his family, and that, you know, he can make good on the things that have happened in his past and just, you know, live out the rest of his days, you know.
Definitely, yeah. It's one of those ones where I think, you know, if you, even Tony Ferguson you mentioned there, like we look at the Gaethje fight, that seemed to have changed the trajectory of his career. Obviously, a very poor performance against Charles Oliveira, but I want to move it on. Just a couple more, Phil. I do appreciate the time. I know you're knackered, buddy.
No problem at all.
Yeah, the MMA media has got a lot of grief over the last number of months, probably more so this year, I think, than ever. What's your impression of being over there this week? Are the MMA media the most complicit in sports media, do you feel?
I think there's a lot of competition for that at the moment, right? So I find a lot of the time that, you know, in soccer, you get a lot of hard questions asked. I mean, I think American media in general, sports media in general, they're pretty good. You know, they'll wear their heart on their sleeve. They'll ask the questions, right? But MMA media is not doing that right now. There are so many questions that need to be asked. For instance, right, Dana White went on about Donald Trump. He spoke on Donald Trump's behalf. Donald Trump is now out and the Senate has been lost. And politically, that's a huge thing for the UFC. When we talk about the Ali Act, when we talk about bringing in rankings, independent rankings, giving fighters their due, right? That's a huge thing. And nobody has asked that question of Dana White. I just cannot get my head around it. Last Wednesday, there was fights the same day that Joe Biden was inaugurated president. This is a huge thing for the UFC. We're not talking about it, right? Another thing is USADA. We're not talking about the fact that testing is limited now because of the pandemic. You just can't move in and out of countries the way that you used to do, right? And, you know, many of us believe, and there was an awful lot of talk about who may have been and who may not have been. Obviously, no names will be mentioned, but that's one of the things that's worrying the MMA media. Why are they not asking the questions of Dana White? Why are they not asking the questions at press conferences? An awful lot of the questions are very sort of softball questions that we're getting. I mean, yeah, exactly. But there's no, you know, I think there was a couple of questions there yesterday that sort of annoyed me. That, sometimes you get the feeling that somebody's asking a question to be seen on social media or on YouTube or that kind of thing, or that they're afraid to offend the person that they're talking to. Right now, I've asked hard questions of Conor before. I've very seldom had a chance to talk to Dana White, despite the fact I've been asking to interview him for probably 7 years now, and I never get a chance to do it. And Dana White has nothing to fear from me, right? And I don't think the MMA fighters have anything to fear from the media asking harder questions, because at the end of the day, I don't think that Dana White is a bad person. I don't think that he's a bad father. I have opinions that have questions about how he runs his business and how he looks after the people that he says he looks after. And it's the same thing for fighters. I'm asking about performance. I'm not asking about your personal qualities, right? Now, some of those personal qualities are mirrored in your performance, but I'm not saying that you're a bad person just because you lost a fight or because you won a fight. I'm not saying you're a great guy either. So I think we need a situation where, we can't be friends with these people, right? Or if we are friends with these people, we have to park it. And I'll give you an example of that, right?
Yeah,
there's a guy who plays soccer here for AIK in Stockholm called Henok Goitom, right? Henok and I, we together with 4 or 5 other people, we ran a football club together here for 6 or 7 years, right? He has been on this couch with me. He's eating his dinner in this house. His wife and my wife get on fantastically. He gets on great with my kids, right? When he plays and he's standing on the other side of the mix zone, just another Joe, right? I have to ask him the same question. If he gets a red card, if he misses a sitter in a derby, I have to ask him that question. On the understanding that, when the interview is over and the dictaphone or the phone is turned off, then we go to the other end. It's like, how's Nina? How's the kids, right? And that's the way it has to be. We have to separate the professional from the personal. So when I speak about Conor McGregor, I'm talking about Conor McGregor, the public figure, not Conor McGregor, the father, not Conor McGregor, the partner to Dee Devlin, not the son to Tony and his mother. That's not who I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about the public figure. And in the same way, I'm talking about Dana White in that way. I know Dana White loves the Boston Celtics just as much as I do. I'd happily talk to him about that over a beer. But when he takes that microphone or when he sits down in front of my dictaphone, well, then we got to do this like men. We've got to do this like professionals. My profession is I'm a journalist. His profession is he runs the biggest promotion in the world. And my job then is to ask him questions that he's probably not going to enjoy answering, but that fans and the fighters and everybody else around the world deserve to hear the answers to. And the more that we can do, the better.
Yeah, and I think it's something, and I'm not going to name any names now, but I think it's something that's definitely got lost in MMA, and especially I think over the last couple of weeks we've seen people.
Well, I think in the last year
openly on social
sorry
media
to interrupt you, Noel, but
support a fighter.
Yeah, we've had that, but also there has been a huge attrition rate because of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? An awful lot of decent, good, hard-working, honest journalists, the people who ask the hard questions, have actually lost their jobs. So what we're left with really is, and again, I don't want to name names, and I also don't want to have a go at the people who were there and who asked those questions, right? Because they're doing what they feel is their job, right? Maybe they don't have a journalism background. Maybe they come from a situation where they're writing blogs, where they're writing fan pages to begin with, and they haven't made the transition into thinking of, okay, what is it that I owe my readers or my viewers or my listeners here, right? And that's fine too, but we have to have both, right? We have to have fan-generated content, but we also have to have journalism, right? Journalism is a process of verification, nothing more, nothing less. It's asking people questions and getting answers to them and seeing if those answers stand up. That's all that it is, right? It has nothing to do with the fact of, I don't think anybody knows what I think of Conor McGregor as a fighter. My personal opinion of Conor McGregor as a fighter. I don't think anybody knows what I think of Dana White as a person either, because I don't bring those things into the public domain, right? I have views of them as professionals because that's my professional obligation here. And we need to have just a little bit more of that. And again, as you well know, I'll talk to anybody. I'll talk to any journalist, I'll talk to any fighter, I'll talk to any promoter about these things off the record. If you want to know what needs to be fixed, I'm there to talk to absolutely anybody. If you're a fighter and you're wondering, why do I get such a hard time, why did they not pump me up, why are they mean to me after a loss, right? I'll explain to you exactly how the whole thing works. You don't have to reach out to me through the bash. You can do it privately, and I'll talk to anybody about it, because we all benefit from it, right? The more open and honest we can be about the whole sport, well, the quicker it's going to get better.
I totally agree, and I think that's, you made the point there earlier on about, parking a relationship, and I think maybe guys need to make that more clear, when they're doing interviews with these guys, that listen, this is business, and outside we'll have a beer, whatever, but this is business here and then. I think that's definitely been missed somewhere along the line. Phil, one for you, and I do appreciate it, man. Is there anything we can do to fix this? The UFC obviously have to get on board in order to help this problem go away. I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially after the last year. They've basically taken a control and a stranglehold on the media and what they want to do and what they want to get out. Is there any way possible we can fix this? I think everyone sort of has to come together in order to make that happen, and I don't envisage that happening myself.
It's a tough one not to crack now, right? But one of the things that I've missed over the last year is the thing of being in the fighter hotel, being around the fight people, right? Because we talk to people, we talk to coaches, we talk to managers, we talk to fighters themselves. One of the big things, the most enjoyable thing for me of the whole trip was Amir Albazi, who was actually, I don't know if I told you this story, but Amir grew up here in Sweden. He moved here from Iraq when he was 8 years old, right? And the UFC said to me, you got to get your couple of COVID tests sorted out. So I went down to the local clinic at the shopping centre down here. And the guy I booked my 2 COVID tests with is Amir's cousin, Nassim, right? And Nassim's other cousin is a guy called Haidar. I've made radio documentaries with Haidar. I've written books for him. We've 2 books coming out now in March in Swedish, right? So I actually know all of his cousins. I played football with them. You know, they're all my neighbours here. And it was brilliant to go over there and to talk to Amir. And Amir is also part of Audiata. He's also part of Paradigm, which is Tony, or at least it was Tony, and it's Connor, and it's all. So when we talk to these people, we find out things, right? Because we create these relationships. But I'm never behind the door and explain to somebody like Amir when I meet him for the first time who I am, who I work for, and what I'm doing there, right? So again, certain people will tell you things. An awful lot of people told me things this week off the record, right? So you're not going to go and put this down anywhere. You can try and verify it and find it somewhere, but you learn stuff about people. You learn stuff about who's making weight, who's not making weight, who's possibly on drugs, who hasn't been training, who's been drinking, all those kinds of things, right? You don't use that. Again, it's a relationship based on trust. And then when the time comes, you can say to the person, look, do you want to go on the record here? This is an important thing for fighter welfare. It's an important thing for contracts. It's an important thing for this guy who's going to, whatever. And then you can do those things. So let's remember that the UFC doesn't really want journalism. It wants PR. Right. And a lot of the time, fighters don't want journalism. They want PR as well. But they actually benefit from journalism, right? Because there's no credibility in PR. PR is one side of the conversation, right? Journalism, as I mentioned earlier on about 10 minutes ago, is a process of verification. That's taking the PR, right? And it's hammering the shit out of it to see if what's in it stands up, right? So all of these things, when we think about Fight Island, we have to think about how it's financed. We haven't heard anything about how the local government has gone in, what it's financed, what resources they've given to the UFC, because these questions haven't been asked. If that was happening in the Champions League with FIFA or UEFA, if it happens with the Olympics, there's a huge political discussion around all those things. And yet we don't get it with, Nevada, with the commission. We don't get it anywhere we go with these things. So they're the kind of things that we need. As I say, it's not in the UFC's interest. I think over time that they will learn that it actually is in their interest. It's in their interest to engage with journalists on a journalist level, on the level of journalism, because it will add to their credibility. And they will know then that, we're the people who are holding them to account. And if they can say, look, we have these guys in here, they're close to us, we tell them, we give them access, we let them do their job, we're running a clean business here for the benefit of everybody involved, then that's fine, because we can go, you know what, it's all above board. We've seen the figures, we've seen what they're paying people, this is all cool. Or, maybe this is wrong. Maybe they should be doing more drug testing. Maybe they should be doing more brain scans, But without that access and without that trust, and again, there's no reason to mistrust me. I have, in my entire career, I have had one time that I've misquoted somebody, right? One time I've misquoted somebody, and that was accidental because the quote sheet that I was given, this person was attributed to somebody else, right? So I didn't actually know that I was doing it. Only once, right? I have never been reported. I've never been done by any sort of a higher authority. I've never knowingly told a lie. I've never got it. You can trust me with these things, and I know you can trust you. I know you can trust PT. PT pulling what little hair he has out on occasion because he wants to put things in the right way. Because not only does he love the sport, but he loves telling the truth of the sport, And the more of us that can do that, I think the more of us will get on board to do that. And if we can get the fighters on board and we can get the UFC on board as well, I think we'll have a much more enjoyable sport and a much cleaner sport on every level, financial and drug-wise and fairness-wise as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this, it's utmost important, I think, to tell the truth. And even if you've an argument, you fall out with someone, I think sometimes with fighters, and I had an incident, I'm not going to name the fighter or whatever, we had a bit of an argument after, but he came on willingly on the record, to speak to myself and got a bit pissed off afterwards. It wasn't my fault, but I think they need to understand that professional relationship yet again, as we were alluding to earlier on. If something comes out of a podcast that is on the record and he doesn't like it, he said it, it's really not my problem. And I think fighters need to sort of engage with that as well.
Let me give you an example of that from another sport, right? I was at the Olympics in Pyeongchang in South Korea, right? And there was a biathlete called Sebastian Samuelsson who came to me and we did an interview because he talks a lot about doping. And I said to him, when you're talking to me, right? Again, Reuters News, 1 billion people every day, right? So when you're talking to me, the people in Russia that you're talking about and systematic doping, they're going to hear about this and your social media is going to be lit up. Do you understand what's about to happen to you here now, pal? And he went, yep, you go right ahead. And we did it. And 40 minutes after the interview was published, he sent me a text going, he said, I didn't realize this was going to happen. I said, man, I explained this to you, right? So I would say that an awful lot of fighters don't get that education. If you go to Manchester United, if you go to Paris Saint-Germain, nobody
100%.
ever tells you. And again, if you own a gym, if you're thinking of signing for a fight promotion, I'm right here, lads, right? At Philip O'Connor on Twitter, you'll find me out there, right? I'll talk to anybody and everybody to help you understand how this game works, right? I've had situations that I've seen you in same situations as well. I've written things about people and they've said to me in the heat of the moment, because let's face it, if you lose a soccer match, it's not really that humiliating. If you tap out to a rear naked choke, or if you get knocked senseless on a pay-per-view, right? That's humiliating. Right? And it's very, very difficult. And then when you go online the next day and you see somebody's tagging you in an article that I wrote about this loss that you had, of course you're not going to feel great. Of course you're going to feel humiliated. You know, unfortunately, that's part of the sport. Losing is part of it. And learning to deal with that and the media attention that gets is actually going to help you grow in the long run. But you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware that when you're talking to me, if you don't want something, you know, again, I think Pat O'Mahony, the Irish journalist, always says that, you know, if you don't want it on a billboard outside your mother's house, then don't fucking say it to a journalist, right? And the other thing is, treat every microphone like a hand grenade, right? If you see a microphone in front of you, you go, okay, is that live? Because if it's live, 100%. You could find yourself in a whole heap of trouble, you know? And it's those basic things. And as I say, any gym owner out there, any agent, any manager, any promoter, if you want me to talk about these things, I'll go and do it, because it's so important. This sport has been around now for, we'll say 25, 30, just coming up on 30 years, right? It's grown brilliantly. It's huge. It's one of the most exciting and fastest growing sports out there. But the only way it can make the jump is if it goes to the next level, right? If it agrees to become part of the mainstream and say, yeah, we'll hold ourselves up to scrutiny the way all these other sports do, like tennis and golf. And shitty things happen there as well. And people say dumb shit there as well. But if we learn to deal with those things in MMA, I think it'll be much more enjoyable. And the content that everybody creates is going to be so much better too. Not as good as the Bash, obviously.
I'd love to see the UFC put in like a media training center as well out in the PI. I think it'd be great for the fighters, things like that. Listen, Philip, I know you're knackered. I do appreciate the time. Absolute pleasure to speak to you. A great job as well over the last week over in Fight On. My man, I always appreciate it. Where can the guys find you?
You can find me at Philip O'Connor on Twitter. You can find me at Philip Ablana on Instagram. I went nuts on Instagram, which I don't usually do, but I did it this time because I just didn't have the time. There was so much content coming out of there. And if you have a chance and you know anybody who has a subscription to the Irish Independent, have a look at the articles I wrote, especially the ones I wrote after the fights there over the weekend. They might be premium content, but I was kind of happy with what I wrote there. I think I managed to capture an awful lot of the things that we've been talking about in this conversation. So well worth a read if you have the time. No, again, it's a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Noel.
Brilliant. Philip, appreciate it, my brother. Take care.
Cheers, pal.
Hello, guys. If you want to hear more of The Bash, you can subscribe to us on all our wonderful channels on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and all that other shit.
And click the links below. Click the links below, the notification button. It comes straight to your phone if we've any fresh content. And also hit the subscribe button. It does help. You're some plonker.
It's very serious.